This is part 5 in my series of videos going through the Proco.com Drawing Basics course. In my last video, I covered the shape section of the course, and in this video, I'll be going through how perspective works. In the last few weeks, I hit a couple milestones. I finished off a couple of my pencils, and I also finished my first sketchbook in over 20 years, with most of those drawings being from the past year. I've had some fits and starts over the years as I've tried to get back into this, so it feels good to see some tangible progress. I also feel like my drawing is improving a little bit as I'm learning some new things and gaining back some of that old muscle memory. Alright, moving on to the course. In this section of Drawing Basics, we're going to be learning a little bit about perspective. We're starting with a gentle intro to one-point perspective, as we might expect in something like this. I really appreciate that with all these perspective exercises, that Stan has found some projects to make them a bit more fun. Each one of the projects in this section has some interesting way in which to apply these skills outside of just drawing boxes in space. It makes some of the projects a little more challenging, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The first project was to draw a room in one-point perspective, and so I decided to do my kitchen. I started by doing a thumbnail image. This is where I kind of figured out where I wanted to have my horizon line and my vanishing point. And then I used this smaller sketch as a reference to make my full page image. At this stage, I was doing everything freehand without a ruler. The level 2 exercise for the one-point room was to draw an arcade in perspective with different shaped cabinets. I started this room by setting up a perspective grid based on the tips given in the level 1 demo. I then did a little research to find some photos of arcade cabinets to kind of get an idea of what the silhouette of these different cabinets would look like. And then at this point, I went to work placing those cabinets down the walls in one-point perspective. The pinball machine at the end of the hallway probably gave me the most trouble, since the top of the machine slants up while also receding back into space. On this one, I did use a ruler to make the perspective grid, and then also to check my convergence here and there, although I was still trying to stick to using freehand to make my actual lines on the cabinets. Next, we move on to two-point perspective, drawing portraits in perspective from reference photos. And for the initial project on this one, we were going to be drawing the containing box in perspective of portraits of these heads. I drew all 19 of the reference images that he provided. I had a little bit of a difficult time not jumping the gun into three-point perspective since some of these heads were at really high or low angles. I watched the demo to try to get feedback and correct myself. I was a little disappointed to not have an example of all 19 of them, but the examples he did present were pretty informative on where I was making my mistakes. I made quite a few mistakes at the beginning and was slowly kind of getting it the more of them that I did. One thing I found in the level 2 of this portrait and perspective exercise is that while all these level 1 exercises are fairly straightforward, some of the level 2 exercises really require some prerequisite knowledge or the desire to kind of go learn some things outside of the course. I knew that my lack of knowledge of facial anatomy and structure was going to make these a little bit harder. I ended up going through the whole Proco portrait drawing course to brush up on this. I was more interested in learning about the construction techniques of the overall head and facial features, more so than some of the shading demos on that. I was also reading The Artist's Complete Guide to Facial Expression by Gary Fagan while I was doing this, which helped to reinforce some of these concepts as well. I purposely went and took a peek through the demo videos to choose the same images that he was using in the demo, knowing that he wasn't going to go and do a demonstration of all of the 19 images. This way I could verify how close I was getting with my attempts. On the last one of these I started by drawing a small thumbnail of the angles and also drew kind of an example Loomis head to give me an idea of the direction and angle of the head head before I went ahead with the larger drawing. The next project was drawing mannequinized hands as boxes from reference photos of hands. While this was essentially drawing boxes in space, it was also a little difficult to get past the idea that we were trying to draw recognizable hands. Doing fingertips was difficult because these boxes are supposed to be getting bigger as they get closer to us, but the fingers get smaller at the tips. So I was struggling between just making the boxes in perspective and actually making them look in some way like a hand. We were supposed to be focused on drawing these boxes in 3-point perspective, but I found myself kind of lapsing in my focus on the 3-point aspect of it. Maybe because these boxes were quite small and it was tricky enough just kind of placing them in space at the correct angles than to also be concerned about drawing them with the convergence on all sides. Hands number 2 and 3 were a bit more difficult, and I did okay on them, but I definitely messed up in a couple areas. So I went back and corrected some of these drawings in the places where things were obviously wrong to try to review where I made those missteps. The level 2 exercise for mannequin hands required drawing these same hands, but from a different point of view from imagination. Once again, this level required a bit of existing knowledge about hands or the willingness to go and learn that. Stan linked to some anatomy videos about hands, but for some reason I decided to try to go ahead and do these without watching those videos first, and I kind of regret that decision. I did end up watching those videos afterwards, and they definitely would have been useful going into this exercise. These ones were really hard. I may have chosen some difficult angles, but I also just didn't really know enough about hands to do this particularly well. I was struggling just to know the proportions and how to place these boxes when I didn't have any reference. There were multiple times where I just erased the whole thing and started over as I was kind of trying to make sense of things. And I almost gave up a couple times thinking I was just not ready for this yet. However, I stuck with it and eventually came up with something that was at least reasonable. The final assignment revolved around ellipses, drawing vehicles on wheels in perspective. For the level 1, I chose some boxy cars, the boxiest cars I could find, which was a Jeep and a Range Rover. These ones were a lot of fun. Some of the ellipses on the wheels, the minor axis is definitely off a little bit, but that's okay. I got a little bit better on each one as I went. I did end up using the ruler to map out guidelines for these. It seemed here that any ambiguity as to where these lines intersected, even to the degree of just having a little bit wider line, ended up leading to some really big errors later on. Like the margin of error was just too small to really work effectively freehand without it skewing my results. And I was kind of relieved in the demo and critiques that Stan seemed to confirm that getting the technical aspects right was worth using the ruler at this stage, while trying to work towards moving to freehand as you gained some more of those technical skills. The Wheels on Vehicles Level 2 assignment was to draw a tank, and this was a bit of a step up from the car, having a lot more ellipses. I felt myself having so many more questions about perspective that just weren't covered in these lessons. I know this is an introduction, but I felt like I was just missing some crucial information that I needed in order to be able to do this. The first was how to get the converging lines on both sides of this tank going to the same horizon line, especially when the vanishing points were far off the page. I also couldn't quite figure out how to get an accurate square in perspective. It was easy enough to draw a box, but how did I know that it was an accurate square in which to place those ellipses? I ended up reading Scott Robertson's How to Draw book, which gave me some good techniques for solving these specific problems, along with many more. I'm sure much of those techniques are also covered in a more in-depth perspective course like Marshall's on Proco. Once again here, I needed to use a ruler to get the precision that I wanted when I was extending a grid of 7 boxes going back in space. Those small errors can really cause big changes later on. I didn't end up making the gun bisect directly with the turret because we were never really shown how to intersect a column into the side of another column. So I kind of cheated here and made one side of the turret flat. I need to do a little bit more investigation to try to figure out how to project an ellipse onto a cylinder to see if I can figure that one out. Both this section and reading Scott Robertson's How to Draw book got me thinking about my drawing a little bit differently. They really opened my eyes as to just how quickly I can level up by improving my perspective and construction skills. And I'm starting to see that many of these technical aspects of drawing are really going to help me improve the quality of my drawings overall. and that's really motivating me to continue learning. As far as progress in this course, I'm up to about 44 hours of video instruction and 74 hours of drawing, for a total of 118 hours in this course so far. In my next video, I'm going to be moving on to intuitive perspective. Subscribe to the channel to become a negative space cadet and follow along with where we go next.